He said, "I've been looking for you." He said, "My name's George Jones." And he was gone. He closed his eyes, and that was the end of it.
Even though he passed over a decade ago, the legendary country music artist George Jones, whose song "He Stopped Loving Her Today" is still a favorite among fans. After he passed away, his widow Nancy kept a low profile and refused to speak publicly. However, our impression of George has changed once Nancy came up with alarming details. In such case, what is Nancy's opinion on George? What stunning information has she shared? Uncover these details with us while you sit back and relax. All right, let's begin. We need a solid foundation in George Jones's early life before we can go head first into Nancy's astonishing discoveries. George Glenn Jones came into this world in Saratoga, Texas on September 12, 1931. He and his siblings, a brother and 5 sisters, were raised in the southeast Texas town of Colmesneil in the Big Thicket area. George Washington Jones Sr. was a talented musician whose father worked at a shipyard. The Pentecostal church featured his mother Clara's, née Patterson, Sunday piano performances. When Jones was 7 years old, his parents bought him a radio, and it was his first exposure to country music. He had warm memories of Saturday nights spent in bed with them listening to the Grand Ole Opry. To avoid missing any of Roy Acuff's or Bill Monroe's concerts, he had his mother wake him up if he dozed asleep. The untimely demise of Jones's sister Ethel, as detailed in his memoir, I Live to Tell It All, intensified his father's alcoholism, which in turn caused him to physically and emotionally abuse his family. After a long day out drinking, George Washington Jones would often call his son into bed with him so he could perform a duet or face punishment. Despite going through all that she did, Jones's love for singing became stronger. In an episode of Inside Fame airing on CMT, country music historian Robert K. Ehrman said that Jones's drive to become a performer was strengthened by the abuse, rather than weakened by it. In his book, Jones acknowledged the complicated connection he had with his father and admits to having conflicting thoughts towards him throughout his life. Jones started learning guitar chords and melodies at church after receiving his first instrument from his father when he was 9 years old. Pictures taken at an early age show a young George performing as a busker in Beaumont, where he would later build his career. George departed for Jasper, Texas when he was 16 years old, to join fellow artist Dalton Henderson on the KTXJ radio station, where they sang and played music. After a while, he switched to KREC, where he met his hero Hank Williams by coincidence during an afternoon program. In his 1989 documentary Same Ol' Me, Jones reflected on the experience and admitted, "I couldn't think or eat nothing unless it was Hank Williams. He had to be really the greatest." Jones wed Dorothy Bonvillian in 1950, but they divorced the following year in 1951. Shortly after, he joined the U.S. Marines and remained in San Jose, California until his release in 1953. George became a revered country music star. How did he get there? And Nancy, what are you going to say? Stay tuned for further updates. Shirley Ann Corley was Jones's bride in 1954. Starday Records published his self-written first single, No Money in This Deal, in February after its recording on January 19th. Producer and mentor H.W. Jones began working with Jones at this point. One Pappy every day. Jack Starnes, co-founder and producer of Starday Records, had his living room used for the recording. Jones was also employed at KTRM, now KZZB, in Beaumont around this time. It was there that DJ Gordon Baxter gave him the moniker Possum. Around Jones's formative years in the music industry, Daly warned him against too mimicking the styles of his musical heroes, Hank Williams and Lefty Frizzell. The low production quality at Starday was something that Jones personally mentioned to NPR in 1996. According to him, the recording took place in a cramped living room of a property close to Beaumont, very next to a busy freeway. All things considered, Jones's 1955 single Why Baby Why was his first smash. Legends like Johnny Cash and Elvis Presley were among those he met and played with that year while on tour with the Louisiana Hayride. In 1994, when reflecting on his meetings, Jones told Nick Tosches that Presley often hung out in the dressing room with his closest pals. Johnny Cash was a lifelong friend of Jimmy Jones's, and it was Cash who extended an invitation for Jones to play at the Grand Ole Opry in 1956. In 1956, when Elvis Presley was at the height of his stardom, Jones was pushed to try rockabilly. He reluctantly consented, just to later feel profound remorse. He found the recordings later on and used them as frisbees, he joked in his memoirs. In a 2006 interview with Billboard, Jones reflected on this time and admitted, "I was desperate. When you're hungry, a poor man with a house full of kids, you're going to do some things you ordinarily wouldn't do." He remembered recording songs like Dadgummit, How Come It, and Rocket, even though he didn't want his name linked to rock and roll. Rather, he proposed going by the pseudonym Thumper Jones. The recordings reappeared at a later date, defying his best efforts to purchase all of the masters. Jones switched to Mercury Records in 1957. He would go on to enjoy a string of hit duets with vocalist Jeanette Hicks, beginning with Yearning, which they recorded together. In the same year, Jones's star power surged even higher as Mercury merged with Starday Records. He kept touring rural regions, playing at honky-tonks and bars, frequently driving in a 1940s Packard with his name and phone number painted on the side. Even though his singles were doing well on the charts, his debut Mercury record, Don't Stop the Music, attracted substantial notice. Before his 1959 #1 on the Billboard Country chart with White Lightnin', Jones had dabbled in rockabilly before settling on a more genuine rock and roll sound. Jones wrote or co-wrote several of his best singles early in his career, demonstrating his skill as a songwriter. Songs such as Window Up Above and Seasons of My Heart were recorded by many performers, including Johnny Cash and Mickey Gilley, and eventually became classics. Popular songs written by Jones include Just One More and Life to Go, and she often worked with her childhood buddy Daryl Edwards. It was a watershed moment for Jones when he signed with United Artists in 1962. His voice improved, and his signature singing style became more defined with the publication of his single, She Thinks I Still Care, which became one of his most popular songs. Albums including Hank Williams and Bob Wills tunes, along with duets with Melba Montgomery, were recorded by him at this time. According to Merle Haggard's recollection in a Rolling Stone tribute, Jones's reputation as an unpredictable and chaotic performance also increased. A band of gifted musicians known as the Jones Boys backed Jones throughout his career. Notable members of the Jones Boys musical roster were Dan Schaefer, Sonny Curtis, and Johnny Paycheck. Ron Gaddis took the helm as bassist in subsequent years, while Lorrie Morgan joined in the late 70s and early 80s as a backup vocalist. One of the most memorable songs from Jones's latter career was Choices, the lead single from his 1999 album Cold Hard Truth. The music video for the song also won Jones a Grammy for Best Male Country Vocal Performance. The song, however, became embroiled in controversy during the CMA Awards ceremony. It seemed like fate had brought these two musical icons together when George Jones and Tammy Wynette tied the knot. Their 6-year marriage captivated the public's attention. However, it became apparent that their relationship wasn't as ideal as it appeared behind the scenes. Impressive duets such as Golden Ring and Near You elevated their partnership to a whole new level. But deep down, they were battling a lot of issues in their relationship. Jealousy over their respective careers was a major source of marital strife. George and Tammy were both successful artists before they started dating. Feelings of rivalry and comparison emerged as they attempted to manage their personal and professional lives, putting a strain on their relationship. An already tense situation became much more so due to the media's and the public's incessant monitoring. George and Tammy encountered difficulties balancing their marriage obligations with their respective professions, and their priorities were at odds with one another. Their divergent career and personal trajectories led to friction, highlighting the challenge of achieving unity when goals are at odds. George Jones's well-publicized struggle with addiction was perhaps the biggest obstacle. His battles with substance misuse tainted their relationship, making it even more unpredictable and unstable. The pressure on their marriage was intensified by George's infamous no-show Jones reputation, which he gained via his erratic conduct and missing performances. George Jones and Tammy Wynette's marriage eventually failed due to underlying problems, despite the early promise and irresistible appeal of their partnership. As turbulent as George and Tammy's relationship was, its dissolution marked the end of an era in country music and the loss of a personal link. As they parted ways, the duo, who had wowed listeners with their perfect harmony and passionate love songs, began to sing other music. Their split changed famous alliances and had far-reaching effects beyond their personal lives, impacting country music history. Tammy Wynette shone incredible strength and flexibility in the face of adversity, even after her divorce. Despite the upheaval that accompanied the dissolution of her marriage to George, she persisted in her pursuit of a career in country music, which had served as both her foundation and inspiration. Despite the ups and downs of each marriage, Tammy always looked forward to starting over. She continued to captivate audiences with her emotionally charged performances and strong voice, solidifying her place as an iconic figure in country music throughout. Tragically, Tammy Wynette's life was abruptly ended in 1998, capping off a turbulent path wrought with fame, love, and personal struggles. It was obvious from the beginning that George and Tammy's story would conclude on a depressing note, even if their marriage exemplified the qualities of a timeless country song: love, heartache, and complexity. Despite the challenges Jones had with his other marriages, the tale of his love with Nancy Sepulvado stands out in country music history. Their story starts with a blind date that George Jones went on in November 1981, which changed his life in many ways. George had been through the highs and lows of 3 marriages before he met Nancy. Along the way, he wed Dorothy Bonvillian, Shirley Ann Corley, and the legendary Tammy Wynette, with whom he had fruitful musical partnerships and rocky divorces. The public's interest in Jones's romance past had complicated matters, particularly about his connection with Wynette. But a new chapter started for the country music great George Jones when he met Nancy Sepulvado. Jones said in his 1996 book I Live to Tell It All that his feelings for Nancy were more profound than any adolescent romance. Recognizing her as a pivotal character in his rescue, he freely recognized her capacity to shatter the barriers surrounding his heart. George Jones and Nancy Sepulvado's marriage on March 4, 1983, at the house of George's sister Helen Scroggins in Woodville, Texas, symbolized a fresh start to overcome George's problematic history. It highlighted the strength of love and Nancy's dedication to George through all of his public difficulties. George continued to be a beloved character in country music despite his troubled life, which included a history of addiction and several missed performances. Substance abuse and troubled relationships dominated his life away from the spotlight. But Nancy saw through the facade and identified the guy behind the stories. Seeing George for who he really is, not just as one of many labels or nicknames, was a deciding factor in her choice to marry him. Because of her extensive knowledge of George's background, Nancy was always there for him. No-Show Jones had a troubled past, and she was aware of it, but it didn't stop her. When asked about George's problems, Nancy said she had heard about them but wanted to wait to pass judgment until she had been through it herself. Being married to George Jones meant experiencing everything, and Nancy was there with it all. She was there during his moments of artistic genius, professional victories, and difficulties brought on by his inner turmoil. Nancy was there for him through thick and thin, offering constant encouragement and support. George Jones and Nancy Sepulvado's wedding. George Jones and Nancy Cieto's marriage was anything from typical, characterized by the deep and life-altering influence their bond had on George's turbulent existence. George's personal life and distinguished profession were illuminated by Nancy's unwavering love and support, which marked a turning point in his well-documented struggle with addiction. Even though many people tried to help George overcome his addiction, he continued to battle for a long time. After several attempts at assistance from friends, relatives, medical professionals, therapists, and clergy, he finally found relief when Nancy entered his life. According to George, his change began with Nancy's love, and he was able to succeed where others had failed. Since they chose not to start a family together, their marriage was unconventional. Rather, a strong emotional link was the foundation around which their bond was created. George frequently used the phrase soulmate to describe Nancy, highlighting the deep connection they had. A small private ceremony at George's sister's house and a post-wedding luncheon at Burger King highlighted their genuine, unassuming love for one another. George and Nancy's relationship demonstrated that they cared for one another beyond financial gain. They delighted in the little things in life. After George's death on April 26, 2013, many in the music business lamented the passing of a true icon. In keeping with her unwavering devotion, Nancy did something special to commemorate his life. In Nashville's Wood Cemetery, she laid a tombstone at his graveside that said, "He stopped loving her today," a reference to George's most famous song and a symbol of their eternal love. Many people, while thinking about George Jones's life, wanted to know what was so remarkable about his marriage to Nancy. Their loved ones thought it was love's transformative power. For them, love was more than a theoretical concept. It was the driving force that helped them overcome the difficulties they encountered in life. George Jones's personal story, with all its ups and downs, is an integral component of his legacy. His influence extended well beyond his music. In her candid book, Play and Possum, Nancy Jones gives readers an intimate glimpse into the nuances of their shared lives, illuminating the country music icon behind his public image. This autobiography explores George's lifelong battle with addiction and offers an honest look at his path to recovery. According to Nancy's narrative, one of the turning points in George Jones's life happened in 1999. His near-death experience in a vehicle crash brought home how precarious life is. George was talking to his stepdaughter when he lost control of the automobile and crashed into a concrete bridge, killing everyone inside. Rescue workers toiled for more than 2 hours to extract him from the rubble in the midst of the mayhem that ensued. During the helicopter transfer to the hospital, George's life was in jeopardy due to his severe injuries. He flatlined twice. George was poised on the brink of eternity, a stark reminder of how fragile life is. Still, he refused to give up to the impending doom. According to Nancy, he was just not ready at the time. After 14 more years of defying death, George Jones finally passed away in 2013 after an unyielding fight. Play and Possum, Nancy's book, offers an unvarnished look into her marriage to George Jones, delving into the difficulties caused by his struggle with addiction and the far-reaching consequences it had on his professional and personal life. Nancy doesn't sugarcoat the truth when she talks about the problems they had, such as George's tendency to skip performances, which brought on a wave of lawsuits and damaged his reputation in the industry. Contrasted with the renowned figure that spectators adored on stage, George's transformation at home due to addiction was striking. The story goes beyond the glossy side of celebrity and into the tough realities of protecting their property from drug traffickers and dealing with situations where they felt endangered. George and Nancy's struggles with addiction are depicted in the biography in a vivid and realistic manner. The 1999 vehicle accident, which George narrowly avoided death in, was a watershed moment on his road to recovery. When George realized he might not make it, Nancy recalled that he made a serious promise to both God and her. He promised he would never drink or smoke again. Unbelievably, he maintained his resolve, signaling a turning point in his life. After making this commitment, George became a new spouse who, according to Nancy, came close to perfection, committing to a life of faith and sobriety. Nancy has preferred to live a solitary life since George Jones's death and has opted to remain low profile. But 2017 was a watershed year for her personal journey, as she had eye surgery to restore eyesight to her left eye. You may see Nancy's continuing health journey in this health update that George Jones posted on his official Facebook page. Nancy has shown a great commitment to protecting George's legacy and making sure his life is accurately portrayed in the years following her husband's death, taking the initiative on occasion to do so. She denounced a painting in Nashville in 2019 that, in her opinion, portrayed George inaccurately. She made her stance clear in the public eye that she would not compromise his reputation in the country music industry. At the time of his passing, George Jones was believed to have had a net worth of around $35 million. After this, Nancy received a large chunk of his fortune, which included Nashville and Brentwood homes in addition to their house in Franklin, Tennessee. Along with the vehicle, jewels, and instruments that belonged to George, she also got his personal possessions. Nancy reportedly resides in Woodville, Texas at the moment, where she prefers to remain out of the spotlight. When she does speak in public, it is often to honor George's legacy and recall his many contributions to country music. Although Nancy is usually rather private, her rare public appearances highlight her unwavering commitment to her soulmate and the legendary artist whose legacy she is tirelessly working to preserve. The ups and downs of love and vice were the most extreme points of George Jones's life. In spite of all of these personal upheavals, his impact on country music will live on. Melodramas like The Grand Tour and He Stopped Loving Her Today attest to his unparalleled impact on the genre and how deeply embedded his influence is. Despite the difficulties in his personal life, Jones's legendary position endures due to the enormous effect he had on country music. His peers acknowledged his extraordinary talent for transforming ordinary songs into masterpieces. Alan Jackson famously said, "When you hear George Jones sing, you are hearing a man who takes a song and makes it a work of art." George had a unique talent for bringing profound emotion to even the most basic melodies, taking listeners on emotional roller coasters. George Jones's ability to convey a wide range of emotions, from sadness in The Cold Hard Truth to joyous dancing in White Lightning, established him as a genuine musical legend. Many consider George Jones's voice to be among the best in country music. It could express everything from extreme delight to deep melancholy. Every song he sang had a genuine, heartfelt feel because of his singing ability. However, George's influence on country music went well beyond his incredible singing voice. His music was more than simply music. It was his unparalleled talent for making listeners feel real emotions. His songs became tales, incorporating lessons and anecdotes from his life into the canon of country music. George Jones's talent for making listeners feel something with every song was his defining characteristic. Instead of being impersonal pieces of music, his compositions took listeners on an emotional journey. From the melancholy "He Stopped Loving Her Today" to the rousing "White Lightning," George had a talent for transporting his listeners to the core of his stories through his music. His songwriting career allowed George to deftly move from heartfelt ballads like "Walking the Floor Over You" to more contemplative pieces like "Tender Years." His music served as a soundtrack for all of life's different moments, providing comfort in times of sadness and ambiance for happy celebrations. George Jones's songs were more than simply tunes. They were there for listeners through the highs and lows of life's many emotions. George Jones is still adored by country music fans despite his troubled romantic life and personal issues. He was beloved by audiences because his imperfections made him more relatable, rather than ruin his reputation. His fans were able to see themselves reflected in him, which allowed them to connect with him on a deeper level than just the surface level of fame. His dedication to country music was rooted in love, not money. As he vehemently argued in a 2006 interview with Billboard, "It's never been for the love of money. I thank God for it because it makes me a living, but I sing because I love it, not because of the dollar signs." This emphasized his true passion for the art, demonstrating that his devotion to country music was genuine. Jones wasn't content to live for himself. He also tried his best to encourage aspiring country music artists to follow in his footsteps. Knowing how important it was to keep country music's core values alive for generations to come, he used his influence to support and promote up-and-coming artists. Reflecting on Jones's persona in 1995, Alan Jackson remarked, "Everybody knows he's a great singer, but what I like most about George is that when you meet him, he is like some old guy that works down at the gas station, even though he's a legend." The music industry paid tribute to George Jones after his passing for his unparalleled impact. He was lauded by Andrew Muller, who wrote about him in an uncut piece, as one of the all-time great interpretative vocalists. Based on Muller's assessment, it's safe to say that no country composer working in the past half-century hasn't fantasized of having his or her songs performed by the famous George Jones. George Jones has a voice of extraordinary range, natural elegance, and crystal-clear tone, as eloquently described by Nick Tosches in his 1994 article for Texas Monthly. Jones possessed a unique blend of melancholy and recklessness, which Tosches highlighted by emphasizing his deft transitions between high tenor and deep bass. David Hajdu analyzed the singularity of Norah Jones's singing voice in a piece for The New Republic. He made the observation that Jones's voice did more than only communicate the substance of the words. They enthralled audiences with the exquisite beauty of his sound production. The unusual and emotionally resonant sound of Jones's voice was enhanced, according to Hajdu, by his uncommon vocal practices. These techniques included singing from the back of his throat, constricting his larynx, and channeling air via his teeth. When David Cantwell recalled George Jones's vocal technique in 2013, he compared it to a method actor's. According to Quell, when writing a song, Jones would often reflect on his personal experiences in a way that was similar to the characters. His performances became genuine portrayals of the human condition instead of theatrical productions thanks to this method, which he used to establish an air of authenticity. Jones explored the lives of common people, creating stories that struck a chord with deep empathy. According to Rich Kenzel's liner notes for Essential George Jones, The Spirit of Country, he was gifted at imbuing ballads with profound feeling, transforming them into deeply moving performances that brought up unfiltered pain. Jones created an intimate bond with the feelings conveyed by his music through his vocals. Colin Escott, a country music historian, highlighted Jones's significant impact on the development of the genre. In his song It's All Right, Waylon Jennings repeated this idea, stating that modern country music is mostly shaped by George Jones. In the same vein, Jennings reflected on how everyone wants to sound like Jones. The unparalleled brightness and workmanship of Jones's voice were compared by Merle Haggard to those of a Stradivarius violin. Emmylou Harris summed up Jones's talent when she said he was a master at making every song sound great. This attitude was front and center on the album cover for Jones's 1976 release, The Battle, which showcases the enduring influence of his exceptional interpretation. In the documentary Same Old Me, several country music artists praised Jones for his unparalleled ability to convey deep emotions via his songs. Jones seemed to have lived every word of every song he sang, according to Randy Travis, while Tom T. Hall said that Jones had an eerie knack for getting his point across. Roy Acuff once said that he wished he could sing like Jones. Jones has left an impression that goes well beyond his lifetime of work. His enduring influence on vocal talent was further cemented in 2023, when Rolling Stone placed him at 24th on their list of the 200 greatest vocalists of all time. The fact that Jones was outspokenly named the best country music vocalist of all time in Season 2 of the podcast Cocaine and Rhinestones is another proof of his enduring impact on the genre. In light of the information that George Jones's wife has disclosed, what are your feelings on the matter? Leave a remark if you like. We appreciate you taking the time to view this movie, and we hope you enjoyed it. Click the link that appears on your screen to stay updated on your beloved celebs, where we meet next.